The morning Riordan Vance noticed that his senior financial analyst's hands were shaking. Her numbers were the best in the room. That evening, her fiancé's phone went dark. His lease was terminated, and he boarded a red-eye to Vancouver with nothing but a single suitcase and a very clear understanding of what would happen if he ever returned to Toronto. Cordelia Thatch had not planned to become indispensable to the most feared man on Bay Street. She had simply done her job, quietly, brilliantly, and with the kind of meticulous precision that most people overlooked entirely because they were too busy looking at everything else about her. At 31, Cordelia, Corey, to the handful of people who'd ever bothered to stay long enough to learn her preferred name, was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and restructure an entire financial model in the time it took the senior partners to finish their coffee. She was also the kind of woman who had learned, over years of deliberate erosion, to apologize for that precision before anyone had the chance to find fault with it. She stood in the lobby of the Vance Tower on King Street West that Tuesday morning in October, adjusting the strap of her laptop bag against the soft curve of her shoulder. The chill off Lake Ontario still clung to her coat. At a size 18, Cordelia had grown accustomed to the particular choreography of dressing for a corporate environment. The deliberate choices, the calculated neutrals, the blazers structured enough to signal seriousness. Today she wore a deep burgundy wrap dress that she had bought 3 weeks ago on a rare afternoon alone. She had almost returned it twice. Shane had not seen it yet. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor and told herself the slight trembling in her fingers was just the cold. Vance Capital Development was, on paper, one of Toronto's most respected, privately held real estate and infrastructure conglomerates. Off paper, in the quieter corners of Bay Street lunch meetings and St. Andrew's Club back rooms, it was something else entirely. Riordan Vance did not discuss what that something else was. He did not need to. The city knew. The city had always known. He was 40 years old, lean and dark-haired, with the kind of composed, unreadable face that made junior associates work twice as hard just to avoid being in the same room as him during a review. He had built his empire from the infrastructure his father left in disarray and turned it into something that made investors nervous and competitors extinct. He was not cruel for the sake of it. He was precise, which was, in many ways, worse. Cordelia had worked for Vance Capital for 4 years. She had met Riordan exactly 17 times in formal settings, and perhaps a dozen more in passing. He had never looked at her the way some of the senior directors did. The quick flick of assessment, the faint shift of expression that said you don't fit the mold, before they'd heard a single word from her. Riordan Vance looked at people the way a man looks at a balance sheet, searching for the line that explained everything. That Tuesday, for the first time, he looked at Cordelia Thatch and found it. The quarterly board presentation was at 9. Cordelia had been in the office since 6:30, cross-referencing 3 datasets that a junior analyst had merged incorrectly the previous week. She had fixed the error quietly, without telling anyone who was responsible, and rebuilt the summary tables from scratch. The presentation was flawless by 8:15. She knew it was flawless. She had checked it 4 times. She was still apologizing before she'd said a single number. So I know some of these projections might look a bit conservative, and I'm sorry if the formatting on slide 7 is hard to read. I tried to keep it clean, but there's a lot of data, so I apologize for that, and the Q3 variance is a little higher than anticipated, which I can explain. It's not. I just want to say up front that I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm sorry if... Miss Thatch, Riordan's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It cut through the boardroom the way a line drawn in ink cuts through pencil. The numbers. Cordelia stopped. She pressed her lips together. Her hands, resting on the edge of the presentation clicker, were trembling, not dramatically, not visibly to most people in the room. But Riordan Vance was not most people. She gave the presentation. It was exceptional. Every projection was grounded, every variance accounted for, every risk modeled with a clarity that the CFO, a man with 23 years of experience, quietly admitted to his assistant afterward was the best financial summary he'd seen all quarter. Cordelia apologized twice more before she sat down. Riordan said nothing. He wrote one thing on the legal pad in front of him. Not a note about the numbers. The numbers were fine. He already knew the numbers were fine. He wrote a name. He underlined it. He tore the page from the pad after the meeting ended and carried it down the hall to the office of his head of security. By 6 o'clock, the 42nd floor had emptied out to the particular stillness that only exists in high-rise offices after dark. The hum of the ventilation, the faint glow of the CN Tower visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city below moving on without anyone asking permission. Cordelia was still at her desk. She had her phone face down. She had flipped it over once, seen 2 messages from Shane, and flipped it back. She did not need to read them to know what they said. The first would be about dinner. Had she remembered to defrost something? Why hadn't she confirmed? Did she ever think about anyone other than herself? The second would be a variation on the first, with an added note about her tendency to lose track of time because she had no real concept of how hard other people worked. She was halfway through a review of the Q4 projections when the intercom on her desk clicked on. Cordelia, Riordan's voice, "Come in." She gathered her notepad out of habit, though she suspected this was not that kind of meeting, and pushed open the heavy glass door to his office. He was not behind his desk. He was at the long walnut table near the window, and spread across it was food, actual food, not a catered tray of conference sandwiches going dry at the edges. There was a container of butter chicken from a restaurant Cordelia had walked past 100 times and never gone into, a naan still warm enough to have steam rising from it, sag paneer, 2 bottles of sparkling water, and what appeared to be a small dish of gulab jamun. "Sit," Riordan said. "I should really get home. Shane is." "Sit down, Cordelia." She sat. It was not the first time she had noticed that Riordan said her full name the way no one else did. Not clipped, not perfunctory, but with a particular deliberateness that made it sound like he meant exactly the syllables he was using. "I didn't realize you knew what I liked." Amir mentioned the place on your lunch order from March. He said it simply, without emphasis, and began plating food for her without asking. "You've worked 12 hours today. Eat." Cordelia stared at the plate. The smell of the butter chicken made her mouth water in a way that felt almost embarrassing. "I can't," she said quietly. "Shane, we're doing low carb right now. He's been on me about it. We're getting married in 8 months and he wants the photos to look." She stopped. The words had come out before she could manage them. Riordan set the serving spoon down. He did not say anything for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very even. "The wedding photographs. He just thinks it would be better if I..." Cordelia looked at her hands in her lap. "It's fine. He's probably right. I could stand to lose some weight." Riordan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on her with an expression Cordelia had never had directed at her before. It was not pity. It was not the executive patience she was used to. It was something quieter and more dangerous than both. "You presented the most technically precise financial summary this company has received in 4 years, he said. "You rebuilt Hensley's corrupted dataset at 6 in the morning without telling anyone it was broken, which means you also protected a junior analyst from being dismissed for negligence. You have not taken a sick day since you started here." He paused. "And you apologized 6 times in a 40-minute presentation in which you made not a single error." Cordelia opened her mouth. "I'm not finished." His tone was not unkind. "You apologized for your formatting. You apologized for your variance analysis. You apologized for the font size on a slide that was perfectly legible. And when the CFO thanked you afterward, you told you were sure there were things you'd missed." He held her gaze. "Were there things you'd missed?" "No," she said very quietly. "No," he agreed there weren't. He slid the plate closer to her. Eat, and do not tell me what Shane thinks your body should look like on your wedding day. Something in Cordelia's chest cracked open, very slightly, the way ice does before it gives way entirely. She took a bite. She had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully known, that food could taste like this when there was no one across the table, cataloguing how much of it she took. They ate mostly in silence. Riordan made one dry observation about the city's planning committee that made Cordelia laugh before she could stop herself. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her on the way out. She clapped a hand over her mouth, and he raised an eyebrow. "Sorry," she said reflexively. "Stop apologizing," he said, not harshly, as a fact. She put her hand down. His head of security, a meticulous man named Beckett, who had worked for the Vance family for 11 years, had left a file on Riordan's desk at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Shane Beckett, 35. Insurance broker, mid-level, license under review by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario for misrepresentation on 3 commercial policies. An undisclosed sports betting account through an offshore platform, current losses exceeding $64,000 over 18 months. $220 remaining in the joint account he shared with Cordelia, an account into which her salary had been deposited for 3 years. He had also, Beckett noted, called her workplace twice in the past month to check in, once asking to speak to her manager about her performance issues. The calls had been fielded by reception and not escalated. There were no performance issues. Riordan had read the file in 7 minutes. He had then sat very still for another 3. He drove her home, she protested. He did not engage with the protest. He simply told Beckett to bring the car around and held the lobby door open, and Cordelia found herself in the back of a black Suburban, heading up the Gardiner Expressway toward her apartment in the junction before she had fully processed how it had happened. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I'm aware," Riordan said. "Shane's going to think it's strange." Riordan looked at her for a moment from the opposite seat, his expression unreadable. "Does it concern you what Shane thinks of you receiving a car home after working a 12-hour day?" Cordelia did not answer that. The car pulled up in front of her building. Riordan got out with her, which she had not expected, and walked her to the door. The building was quiet. The light in the second-floor window, their unit, was on. "He's home," she said, and something shifted in her voice. Something went careful and managed, like a person adjusting their posture before entering a room they are afraid of. Riordan heard it. Of course he heard it. "Go upstairs," he said. "I'll be in touch tomorrow." She nodded and went inside. She did not look back. If she had looked back, she would have seen that Riordan Vance did not return to the car. He stood on the pavement for another 2 minutes, looking up at the second-floor window before he made a phone call. Shane Beckett received a visitor at his office the following morning. He was not told in advance. He arrived at 9:15 to find 2 men he did not recognize in the waiting area, and a third already behind his own desk. A quiet, unremarkable man in a grey coat who introduced himself as Beckett and suggested in a very calm voice that Shane take a seat. What followed was not a conversation Shane would ever repeat to anyone. Beckett laid out, methodically and without emotional inflection, exactly what Vance Capital Development was aware of. The FSRA license issue, the offshore account, the joint savings account that now held $220 of the $43,000 Cordelia had deposited over 3 years, the 2 phone calls to her workplace, the documented pattern, receipts, timestamps, call records, of Shane Beckett systematically dismantling the professional confidence of a woman who, without that dismantling, would have made him feel very small indeed. "Mr. Vance is not a patient man," Beckett said, folding his hands, "and Cordelia Thatch is under his protection. I want to be precise about what that phrase means in this context." Shane was pale by then. He was also calculating. Men like Shane were always calculating. It was the quality that made them dangerous, and ultimately their undoing. "She's my fiancée," Shane said. "She was," Beckett corrected, pleasantly. "The FSRA will receive a detailed file by end of business today if you are still in contact with her by this time tomorrow. The offshore platform will receive an anonymous tip regarding account activity that directly contradicts FinTrack reporting requirements. The joint account discrepancy will be submitted to the relevant consumer protection body." He paused. "Or you can pack a bag and move to your brother's place in Vancouver, which we know you have been considering regardless. Mr. Vance is prepared to cover 3 months of transitional expenses as a gesture of goodwill." "This is coercion." "Yes," Beckett agreed. "It is. You have until noon." He left Shane a burner phone with one message already drafted in the notes application, and suggested he copy it, send it from his own number, and then dispose of the device, and that way there would be no record of this conversation existing at all. Cordelia was in the middle of revising a lease portfolio summary when her phone buzzed. From Shane. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I don't think I can do this anymore. There's someone in Vancouver I've been in contact with. It's been going on for a while. I'm sorry. The engagement is off. Don't call." She read it twice. She put the phone face down on the desk. She waited for the weight of it to hit. The familiar compression in her chest, the voice that sounded like Shane's telling her this was what she deserved, that she had pushed him to it, that she was too much and not enough at the same time. The weight did not come. What came instead was so unexpected that Cordelia had to press her fingers to her mouth to keep from making a sound in the open-plan office. It was lightness. A sudden, disorienting, almost dizzying sense of space opening up in her lungs, the way a room feels after the windows are thrown open for the first time in months. She breathed in. She breathed out. She turned back to the lease portfolio and kept working. 6 months in Toronto can change a city around a person. By the following April, the ice had gone from Lake Ontario, and the cherry trees along Bloor Street West were doing their brief and exuberant thing, and Cordelia Thatch was no longer apologising in meetings. She had negotiated her contract renewal, her first negotiation, prepared for with the same methodical care she applied to every financial model, resulting in a 22% increase and an adjusted title. She had overhauled her wardrobe, not because anyone told her to, but because she walked past a boutique on Queen Street West on a Saturday morning and went in, and the woman who worked there treated her like someone who had come to be dressed, rather than someone who had come to be accommodated. She bought a caramel-colored wool coat that made her feel like herself, which turned out to be a feeling she had been missing for some time. She had not lost any weight. The thought, when it occasionally surfaced, had less and less grip on her. Riordan noticed all of it. He noticed the way she walked into the boardroom differently. Not performatively, not with manufactured confidence, but with the natural authority of someone who had stopped spending energy on preemptive apology. He noticed that she pushed back in meetings now, not aggressively, but clearly, with the steady precision of someone who had remembered that her analysis was correct. He said nothing about it directly. He simply stopped interrupting her in presentations, though he had never interrupted her before. The quality of silence a person holds when someone else speaks is a language of its own, and Riordan Vance had become very fluent in listening to Cordelia Thatch. Their evenings ran late. They shared meals more often than not. He ordered from restaurants she mentioned in passing. She stopped refusing to eat freely in front of him. They argued occasionally about risk assessment and expansion timelines, and the arguments were interesting in the way that arguments are interesting when both people are genuinely trying to reach the right answer rather than just to win. She was, he had concluded, the most valuable thing in the building. He had not told her that yet. The right moment arrived on a Tuesday in late April. Cordelia was cutting through the laneway behind the tower when she heard the voice. "Well, don't you look expensive?" She stopped walking. Shane Burkett stepped out from between two parked cars. He looked like a man who had spent 6 months making poor decisions and blaming every outcome on someone else. He was thinner, and his jacket was wrong for the weather in the way that suggested he had not been thinking clearly for some time. 6 months ago, Cordelia would have gone cold, would have started calculating the fastest route to de-escalate, to apologize, to fold herself into something smaller than the situation. She stood still, her bag on her shoulder, and looked at him. Shane. You didn't think I'd find out? He took a step toward her. About your boss? About all of it. I've been doing my research, Corey. Riordan Vance isn't just a developer. I've got contacts, people who know what moves through his port connections, what the CRA has never quite managed to pin down. And you're right in the middle of it. Another step. I want $300,000. You're going to walk upstairs and have your mob boyfriend wire it to me, or I go to the RCMP with everything I have. Cordelia looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the woman who had trembled through a board presentation in October, apologizing for flawless work, apologizing for taking up space, apologizing for being in a room she had more right to than anyone else in it. She thought about what that woman had cost her. You burned through $64,000 in 18 months, she said, her voice very calm. And you're standing here asking for $300,000. Your maths was always the problem, Shane. His face went dark. Don't talk to me like. The door behind him opened. Riordan Vance walked out into the laneway, Beckett 2 steps behind him. Riordan was wearing his coat, which meant he had known, which meant Beckett had been watching the building perimeter, which meant none of this was a coincidence and had not been for some time. Riordan stopped at a distance. He looked at Shane the way a man looks at a figure that does not reconcile on the page, not with anger, but with the cool, focused attention of someone identifying a problem before deciding how to resolve it. You knew, Cordelia said to Riordan without turning around. Beckett flagged the activity when he arrived in the city last week, Riordan said. I was going to tell you tonight. Shane's eyes moved between them, calculating again, still making the same mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he said, reaching for steadiness and missing. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Riordan said. A man who spent 3 years telling a brilliant woman that her intelligence was a liability and her body was an embarrassment, because those were the only 2 tools he had to keep her from realizing she was worth more than everything he would ever become. He slid his hands into his coat pockets. Beckett. Beckett stepped forward. Wait, Cordelia said. Riordan paused. He looked at her. She walked up to Shane, close enough to be unmistakable, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt nothing toward him. Not hatred, not grief, not the complicated residue of 3 years of being told who she was supposed to be. Just a very clear, very settled absence of all the weight she had been carrying. You told me I took up too much space, she said. You spent 3 years making yourself feel better by making me feel like less. She held his gaze without flinching. And the thing is, Shane, I actually pity you for it. Because the whole time you were trying to make me smaller, I was the one keeping the lights on. She stepped back. She turned toward the door. Riordan, the Pemberton file needs to be reviewed before Thursday. I'll have it on your desk by morning, he said, and there was something in his voice, something quiet and certain, that settled in Cordelia's chest like the right number landing in the right column. She went inside. Behind her, the laneway was very quiet for a moment. Then Beckett made a call and a car arrived, and Shane Burkett left Toronto with considerably less than he'd arrived with, and a very precise understanding of the consequences of returning. The private elevator was empty when Cordelia stepped in. She pressed 42 and leaned against the paneled wall, closing her eyes for just a moment, feeling the quiet hum of the building around her. The doors opened on 39. Riordan stepped in. He must have taken the stairs. She had not heard him come through the lobby. The doors slid shut. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The elevator hummed upward. Then Riordan reached across and pressed the emergency stop. The elevator stilled, suspended between floors. Cordelia looked at him. He was looking at her with the same expression she had seen in his office 6 months ago, over butter chicken and sparkling water, direct and unguarded, and completely certain of itself. "I have wanted to say something to you for approximately 4 months," he said. "I have been waiting until the moment was right." Was the laneway the right moment? "No," he said, "this is." He crossed the elevator in 2 steps and took her face in his hands, carefully, the way a person holds something they have been thinking about holding for a very long time, and kissed her. It was not tentative. It was the kind of kiss that has been accumulating over months of late nights and contested risk analyses and meals eaten slowly enough to mean something, certain and warm and thorough. Cordelia's hands came up to grip the lapels of his coat. He pulled her closer with a quiet, unambiguous steadiness, and she stopped thinking about anything except how much space she was allowed to take up right now, which was, it turned out, all of it. When they finally separated, his forehead came to rest against hers. The elevator hummed, waiting. "Corey," he said, her name, the short version, the one only people who stayed long enough ever learned. His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones. "This is not a temporary arrangement." She laughed, the real laugh, the one that surprised her. "You sound like you're closing a deal." "I'm not closing anything," he said. "I'm opening one." He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "Stay, not only as my analyst, as my partner in every sense of the word." She looked at him, this careful, dangerous, precise man who had noticed her hands trembling in a boardroom, and decided, in that moment, that it was the most important information in the room. "You're going to have to stop looking at me during Thursday's acquisition meeting," she said. "I have never once interrupted you. You looked at me, it's the same thing." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. The particular, rare thing that was the closest Riordan Vance came to a smile when he was not entirely in control of it. "Deal," he said. Cordelia Thatch pressed the button for 42. The elevator began to move, carrying them upward together into the lit and humming core of everything she had earned.